I stayed pretty true to that this morning. We weren't too late, and I don't think it'll take very long here this afternoon either. I've got a simple truth I want to get to you. It's so simple that it won't take long to get it to you, but it's also so powerful that if I can get it to you, then it'll be plenty for you to try to chew on all week long anyhow. So we won't have to add to. It'll be sufficient for the time being. And it'll give you plenty to work at this week if I can get it across. And it's not very complicated, so shouldn't be too long is what I'm trying to say. 1 Corinthians chapter number 13 and verse number 1, he said, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing." Well, that is a massive statement. I've sat in my office many times, having given myself to try to have knowledge of the Word of God and try to have faith in the Word of God. Both of those are included in verse number 2. And it says that I can have all the knowledge, I can have all the faith in the world, but if I don't have charity, I am nothing. I can sit in my office for 24 hours a day and cram my mind with as much Bible as I want to, and I can seek to believe it and try to do it, but if I don't have charity, I am still a nobody in the kingdom of God. I am nothing. This tells us that charity is preeminent. It is above everything else, and it is the chief thing that you and I are to be seeking after. After all, when we get charity, we fulfill all of the law. And we talked about this as a precursor before we got into chapter 13 a couple months ago, it seems like. But we remember that Matthew 22 says that if we get charity down, we've got the two greatest commandments. If we love the Lord thy God with all of our heart, mind, soul, that's the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And on these two hang all the law and the prophets. If we get this idea of love, this idea of charity, this idea of agape love down in our Christian life, then everything else flows out of this. Much like we talked about this morning, that if we look unto Jesus, all the other stuff falls in line. And if we learn how to love, all the other obedience to all the other commandments will fall in line, and therefore it is preeminent. With charity, you have everything. Without charity, you are left with nothing. Therefore, verse 3, "And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing." This means that I can give myself continually to ministry, and I can give myself to good deeds, and I can give myself to good works, and still not be doing it from a pure motive of charity. This means that we must not only check what we do, we must check our motive behind why we are doing it. Because it is possible to feed the poor, it is possible to give your body for others, and yet still not have charity, according to verse number 3. And so we need to be mindful of not only what are we doing, but what is the propelling motive for doing it. We often have used the picture of somebody who's giving to a homeless person, but they're only doing it so they can film themselves while they're doing it and get clout from other people for being such a nice person as everybody sees what they've done. It's much like what Jesus counters in Matthew 6 when He says, "See that when you do your alms, you do not your alms to be seen before men." He says, don't let other people see you doing good and do it just so they see you. He says, but rather do it because you've got charity in your heart. And then he's going to begin to describe what charity is and what charity looks like and what we must have to qualify as being charitable or loving Christians. Number one, and we've already dealt with several of these, so we're just going to pick up where we left off. But number one, in verse number 4, we must have long suffering. That's why the Bible said, charity suffereth long. We're not being loving when we're not being long-suffering. And we remember that that suffereth long comes from the Greek word makrothumeo, which literally means long anger. It means you're not quickly angered. You're not short-tempered. It's a long time before you get mad. Somebody's got to push a whole lot of buttons on you before you finally blow your top. That's what it means to be long-suffering. And so when we are short-tempered and when we are pulling apart at the seam out of nowhere, and when we are flipping a switch and doing all those kind of things, we're not being loving, because charity suffereth long. Not only that, charity is kind, according to verse number 4. We talked about what kindness is, and it was actually an interesting definition to me. It means basically to employ oneself at the other's expense, to make oneself useful. So therefore, a kind act is an act in which you make yourself useful or beneficial to somebody else. We always talk about acts of kindness, and those acts of kindness are where you put yourself at somebody else's disposal so that you can help them. That's an act of kindness. That's literally what the word means. So if we are employing ourselves to other people, and we are putting ourselves out there to be used of other people and make ourselves beneficial to other people, we are being kind and we're being loving. But if we are only seeking our own benefit rather than benefiting others, we're not being kind, and therefore we're not being loving. Charity envieth not. That means that charity is not jealous. It's not jealous. There's often a mindset in many marriages that if the husband buys something for himself, then the wife, she's jealous and she's got to go buy something for herself, and it's a tit for tat going back and forth in the marriage. Well, he got something, so I got to get something. Almost like my 4-year-old and my 8-year-old when we go to Walmart. And that's in many marriages. And he says, listen, that's not love. And we try to teach our boys that just because one of you has a toy doesn't mean the other one's got to have that toy. That's not what love is. Love is allowing your brother to play with the toy he wants to play with. And love is allowing your brother to have the benefit even if you don't, and you not getting mad about it. And we talked about how envy right here is not only jealousy, but it's jealousy to the point of anger. Like, it's not just that somebody's got something you want. It's somebody's got something you want and you're mad at them because of it. Love doesn't do that. Love doesn't get frustrated and angry at the excelling of others. Verse 4 going on, charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. I'll put those two together because essentially, from my understanding at this point anyways, it's saying the same thing. Charity doesn't vaunt itself. Charity is not puffed up. In other words, charity is not platforming itself. It is not puffing itself up. It is not prideful. It is not arrogant. It is not big-headed. And then charity doth not behave itself unseemly. And this is where we pick up this afternoon. Charity doth not behave itself unseemly, and seeketh not her own. I don't know how much of that we'll get through, because I'll be honest with you, I was thinking we had already preached that out of verse 5, and we haven't. And so I'm going to have to deal with that first. But that's probably all we'll get to. We'll see what the Lord has for us. But anyhow, this idea right here in verse number 5 is a qualification for charity, alike the ones that we've already read, that charity doth not behave itself unseemly. That word unseemly means in a way that's not right. Unfittingly. You know, charity doesn't cause you to behave out of sorts. As a matter of fact, if I could put it this way, that word doth not behave itself unseemly comes from a Greek word which means this. It literally means to not hold its original form or shape. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in just a moment. It is literally speaking of something that does not retain to its normal form or its normal shape. How many of you have ever heard the phrase, they got bent out of shape? That's literally the picture behind the Greek word where it says, doth not behave itself unseemly. It doesn't break out of the form that it's supposed to be in. Now, we are supposed to be in the form and the likeness of Jesus Christ, and we are to maintain that spirit. We are to maintain that attitude, and we're not to break form. We've also heard that phrase. We're not to jump outside of that. We're not to get bent out of shape. And when we are, we're not being charitable, because charity does not behave itself unseemly. This means that when my children are constantly, daddy this, daddy that, daddy this, daddy that, and I get bent out of shape about it all of a sudden. You snap like that. That's not me being a good parent. That's me not being loving in that moment. And what we would define that as, and I've excused it myself, but we would define it as a moment of frustration. But it's not a moment of frustration. It's a moment in which we're not being loving and we're not being like Christ, because it makes me a good parent or a better parent to think about how God is my Father and how He parents. And, I've often been conflicted with myself. As a parent, we get frustrated when your kids ask you for something over and over and over and over and over again. But yet, God the Father invites you, ask me over and over and over again. I want you to ask me literally until you think I get sick of it, and then I want you to ask me some more. And He never gets tired of us coming to Him saying, Father, I need help, I need help, I need help, I need help. And He never turns and snaps on us and says, I'll deal with you in a minute. But when we do that, we're not modeling His character. When we get bent out of shape in those moments, or not even with children, but when you're at work or anybody for that matter, and it's just something is going on that you're focused on, and there's things that keep vying for your attention, and all of a sudden you bend and you snap over what that subject is. That's called behaving yourself unseemly, and we're not being loving in that moment. There's a lot of what we have passed off for parenting. It's just not Christ-like. This idea of just turning and snapping, and I'm extremely guilty of it myself, but what I find here is that I'm not being loving when I do that. I can try to convince myself that I mean well all that I want, but charity doth not behave itself unseemly. Now, maybe you don't get bent out of shape, so to speak, towards your kids, but maybe you get bent out of shape towards your spouse. I know sometimes I can do that, and I'll just be transparent to you. It happens to me when I've got something going on my mind and I'm trying to think about, and I've got this process, and if you could split my mind open and see it, you would see a bazillion parts laid out on a table, and you would see me trying to put them back together and figure out how to do this. And about the time I get all that tore apart, and maybe Logan asks me a question that has nothing to do with all the parts on the table in my mind, I turn and I snap because I'm busy right now. I'm focused. I can't talk to you about that right now. That's called behaving itself unseemly. And I'm not being loving in that moment. Getting bent out of shape towards your kids, towards your spouse, maybe towards your coworker. Maybe you're bent out of shape towards the drive-through worker. People you come in contact and you break form. You ever remember the original word means to not retain its actual form. There's another word that we use that I think comes close to that, and we talk about somebody being in rare form. Somebody gets mad, and you say, man, they were in rare form last night. What are you saying? You're saying they broke the form and the mold that would have been right for them to be in, and they went into some other rare type of form. And that's the idea behind this. When we have those moments where we jump out of what we should be and how we should be acting, and those split moment decisions and those things that we say like that, that's behaving ourselves unseemly, and it's indication that we need to work on our love towards one another. Now, moving on in verse number 5, charity doth not behave itself unseemly, but also charity seeketh not her own. Now, this is really the only thing I'd intended on preaching. I forgot about what I just covered briefly, but seeketh not her own. If you can get a hold of this, it'll revolutionize your relationships. Ask me, I did it for a day, and it helped. I didn't make it to 2 days. One day, it helped. I noticed it. The second day, I dropped the ball. But it says, charity seeketh not her own. Charity seeketh not her own. You know, we spend so much time seeking our own desires. When you wake up in the morning, you think about your desires. When you're going to bed, you're thinking about your desires. We spend so much time thinking about our own plans. And that's why you get frustrated and you get bent out of shape when somebody interrupts you thinking, because you're thinking about your plans. I don't have time for your plans right now. It's my plans I'm trying to figure out. It's my problem. Get your problem away from me. I'm trying to figure out mine. And that's why we snap like that. But that wouldn't happen if we were not always so busy seeking our own. spending so much time seeking our own happiness, so much time seeking our own will. I said it this morning, but I know when I decide that I'm going to buy something, I will spend hours and hours and hours of research, and I will invest myself in figuring out and trying to make a wise, responsible decision because it's something that I want. You've got things that you want, but guess what? I didn't invest myself in studying for what you want this week. You want to know why? Because I'm selfish. And we all lack love. How many of you spent your time studying out what I got going on in my life? You didn't. You want to know why? Because we seek our own and what we got going on and what we want and the things that we desire. And I'll spend so much time investing myself in what I want. And it hit me the other day. And I'll brag on Logan for just a minute. She's become fantastic about this. And she's never been materialistic, but she has even grown less and less and less and less in that in our entire marriage, to the point where Logan rarely buys anything for herself. Hardly ever. Now, frequently she'll go and she'll come back with something for the boys or maybe even something for me, just as a small act of kindness to do that. But Logan rarely buys anything for herself. But I'm not quite that way. I got things that, I got into this detailing business, and so I'm always thinking about what's the next thing that I need, what would help me, what could I do that would let me offer something to make, a little bit more money or something like that. And my mind's always thinking on that, and I'm like, Logan, I got to go buy this, and I got to go buy that, and all this kind of stuff constantly. And like I said, I'll spend hours on this stuff, trying to figure out the right things that I need. And while I invest hours in myself, I got to thinking about it the other day when I was sitting in my office studying over this, and I thought to myself, what is one thing that Logan just wants right now? And I'll be honest, I drew a lot of blanks. You know why I drew a lot of blanks? Because I'm too busy seeking my own. Couldn't even tell you what she wanted, let alone have I made the emphasis to go get it for her. Because I'm busy about what I want. And honestly, it was a convicting moment because she truly doesn't. She doesn't go pursuing things for her own self. It's always me. It's always the boys. It's always somebody else. It's not her. And that was a realization to me that I'm lacking in that area. And you may be lacking in that area too. And it makes a more loving relationship when you're willing to explore the desires of the people that you're in the relationship with. When you're willing to forget about you for 5 minutes, don't worry, you'll still be there when you come back. Forget about you for 5 minutes and invest in what somebody else has got going on. Consider the person you live under the same roof with. And yes, I know you got your own things in your mind when you go to sleep at night, but pull off of your things for a minute and put your mind on their things for a minute and say, what's going on with you? How can I help you? What do you need? How can I be a benefit to you? And that's just what love does. Spend all that time investing and pursuing the desires of ourselves. But let me ask you, what if we spent that much time, those hours that I'm talking about, I'm investing in these different objects and these different things and studying them. How much better of a marriage do you reckon I would have if I took those hours and rather than investing them in some consumer-based product, I invested them in figuring out what's something that my wife wants right now? You reckon I'd have a better home because of it? I think I would. I think I'd have a better marriage. I think I'd have a better environment to raise my children in, because it would be an environment where love and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ has been demonstrated in. What if we spent that much time, as much as we do on ourselves, investing in others? Romans 15:2 says this, let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. Let every one of us please his neighbor. You ought to just seek out some things that are pleasing to the people in your life and do it. Just think about if brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so, your spouse, your kid, whoever it is that you want to enact this type of kindness, this type of love towards. We should do it with everybody, but you got to start somewhere, right? You're going to start somewhere. For most of us, it would be our spouse, but whatever. Where you're going to start with. And just ask yourself, what is something that would be pleasing to them to do for them? And once you figure it out, go do it. Go do it. Just do something to be pleasing to them, to be loving to them, because charity seeketh not her own. And by the same standard, if we claim that we love somebody and yet we never seek for them, but we always seek for ourselves, by definition, our love has been proven false. That's a challenging statement, but it is true because charity seeketh not her own. As a matter of fact, Romans 15 goes on to say this in the next verse, for even Christ pleased not himself. Jesus woke up every day pursuing his own agenda, but here's the thing about it, his agenda revolved around you and not him. Every day when Christ woke up, it was his final goal in the agenda that he was heading toward was the cross, right? And every day he was taking steps towards that cross, and he was crossing prophecies off so that he could fulfill the law, and he was obeying so he could get to the cross. But even though all these things were on his agenda that he was accomplishing, that cross and that final product was not for him. It was for you. And so even Christ pleased not himself. And if he did not please himself, then you and I are called not to please ourselves. Love does not cater and search out one's own desires. Charity seeketh not her own. You know, and I want to close with this right here. This is why it's revolutionary. When you love others, you're actually loving yourself. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in just a moment. I want you to imagine a marriage where the wife is more committed to the pleasure of the husband than she is to her own desires. I want you to imagine that same marriage and the husband is more committed to the pleasure of the wife than he is his own desires. Does that sound like a happy home? It seems to me that would work out really well. If my wife was able to emphasize my desires because she knew I had her back and I was covering her desires, there's no room for selfishness in that. Selfishness has no place. Pride has no place in that. Covetousness. There are so many sins that you cross off the list and you cut them off at the gate if we were to live that way. Things that would not be present in our home. If we would just be committed to the other and not seeking our own. Imagine a church where everybody put their brother and their sister's needs and desires above their own. That sound like a good church? Sounds like the one that Jesus Christ wanted to establish. Think about this. Imagine a nation where everybody put their neighbor's well-doing above their own. You reckon we'd have a better country right now? Just about all of our problems would be gone if we could truthfully do that. I wonder how many problems in your home would be gone if we could do this. I wonder how many problems in our church would be gone if we could do this. I wonder how many problems would be gone in our community if we could do this. If we could figure out how to put other people ahead of ourselves. You see, if I invest in my wife, you know, generally when you invest in things, the object you're investing in becomes better, right? If you start off with a car that you're restoring that's a pile of junk and you keep investing in it, I would hope a few years later you got a nicer car than what you had when you started. Is that kind of the train of thought? It gets better as you invest in it. And if you keep investing in your wife, you keep investing in your husband, you keep investing in people around you, don't you think that's going to make them better? Don't you think it's going to make them more valuable? And then, if they're valuable and you're in relationship with them, you're going to get to reap the benefit of that value. Let me share with you what I mean by that biblically very quickly. Look at Ephesians chapter number 5. When you put others first, it actually makes things better for you. Yeah, I've said this before, but Jesus Christ and His teachings are totally backwards than what you think. You know, He said things about you want to keep your life, then lose it. He said things like this. If you want things to be better for you, then forget about you. Like it makes no sense to the physical mind. Come to find out, He knew what He was talking about. Ephesians 5, verse 25, we'll talk to the husbands for this illustration. Ephesians 5 and 25, husbands, love your wives. Now that love your wives, that includes all the things in 1 Corinthians 13, right? Because that's what charity is. We all agree with that? It includes seeking not your own. It includes long-suffering, kindness, all that stuff. And then the ones we hadn't even dealt with. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it. You know, there are some people that never had a father to model how to love their mother. A lot of people grew up in that. They grew up in broken homes, busted homes, things like that. And they never saw how a husband was supposed to love their wife. And they get in marriage, and I've seen lost people do this, and they get in marriages and they don't know how to be any better than what they were raised with because that's all that was ever modeled in front of them. But for the Christian who has seen the love of Christ, the standard and the example of how you love your spouse is not in the father that failed in your home, but rather it is as Christ who loved the church. That means even for the fatherless, there's an example of how to be a father. Even those who lacked seeing what it looked like for a husband to love a wife, the example is set forth because it is in Christ, even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it. Gave Himself for it. He commands the husband to love their wife here. And then in the next verses, He's going to connect that love for her to how the husband is actually investing in her and looking for her betterment. Verse 26. He loves her in verse number 25. Here's what that love does. Verse 26. That He might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. So Christ is concerned with sanctifying, purifying, and cleansing and washing His bride. Is that right? Those are acts of nourishment and care. Nurture. Verse 27, that He might present it to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So He loves His wife, therefore He invests in her in verse number 26. And in verse number 27, His investment in her has made her beautiful and glorious. Everybody following me? But He doesn't get the short end of the stick. Why? Because that beautiful and glorious investment He has dumped Himself into is now going to be a gift to Himself. Verse 27, that He might present it to Himself, a glorious church. He puts Himself last, which seems like He's getting the short end of the stick. And He takes everything that's rightfully His, all His glory, and he gets rid of it. John 13, He's bearing a towel and washing the feet of His disciples. He abandons the glory. He takes the short end of the stick, and instead He invests the glory in His disciples. And He invests the glories in His bride and His church, and He makes her beautiful, even at His own expense and His own suffering, and He forgets about Himself that He might invest in her. But He's not going to get the short end of the stick forever, because once she is beautified by the investment He has put in her, she is then going to be a gift unto Himself. So He's actually, by investing in His bride, He's investing in Himself. And what you need to understand is that in your relationships, when you invest in them, you are actually investing in yourself, because you're going to benefit from that relationship. It's going to help you. Like I said, I did this for a day and it worked great. That He might present it to Himself. You know, we read Hebrews 12 both in Sunday school and the first service, and it says, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame. The reason He went to the cross was for the joy. You see, He took the short end of the stick that in the long run He could get the joy, which was the benefit, right? And what is that joy? I believe it's this same bride right here that He's going to present to Himself as a beautiful gift. And then he summarizes this in verse 28. So ought men to love their own wives as their own bodies. Now look at verse 28. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. Now, why is verse 25 such a challenge? Husbands, love your wives. Why is that so hard? Because husbands love themselves and wives love themselves. We are selfish, right? But Jesus flips the whole thing on its head and He says, no, don't love yourself. Love her, and you're going to pour into her and she's going to be better, and then it's going to be better for you. Therefore, if you love your wife, you actually love yourself. And it is this cycle. You know, it's the idea of, I used it in a car a moment ago, but you invest in a car, and why are you investing all of that in that car? So that you get to enjoy driving the thing around, right? You get to enjoy the final product. And this is what our relationships are. They are investments that we pour into. And this is why nobody has relationships anymore, because nobody's willing to invest nothing. Everybody comes into a relationship anymore with a consumer idea. What can I get? Not what can I give. And when you don't give, you have no investment put up in it. And when there's no investment, the car stays a piece of junk and never looks any better than it did. But when you pour into it, when you get done, you'll have a product for yourself. And this is our relationships. We're to love this way. It says, verse 28, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. Verse 29, for no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth it and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. Now, in verse number 28, 27, doesn't that sound like the Lord is nourishing and cherishing the church? He's sanctifying it. He's cleansing it. He's washing it. I mean, I keep having this illustration of the car in my mind again. You got this guy that's invested in this car, and he's out there washing it. He's cleaning it up so that it'll be a nice thing for him to actually enjoy. This is what Christ is doing with the church. And he says, I want you to do this with your wife. And not just the wife, but we are called to love everybody in this manner. Verse 30, for we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. Now, I told you a minute ago, this is not just about the wife. Is your wife the only person you're supposed to love as yourself? Matthew 22, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This type of investment is not just for a husband and a wife. This type of love that is seeking the supreme benefit of those that it's poured out on is not just for the marriage bond. This is for all of our relationships. Verse 33, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. So here's what it comes down to. You ought to be willing to seek somebody else's benefit. Just try it this week. Tomorrow, find you something to do for somebody in your life that you love, or claim that you love anyways. And take a minute and don't seek your benefit, seek theirs. And if you come up with a way that you could be a blessing to them, and you're capable of doing it, do it. Do it. Invest in them. Invest in that relationship. Because one day, guess what? You might need that relationship. You might need it. Once again, this is why people, I don't have any friends, and I don't have this, and I don't have that. The Bible said a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. That's a proverb. That's wisdom. If you're going to have friends, you got to be friendly. If you want people to invest in you, you got to invest in them. And people are just that. They are an investment. Your spouse is an investment. Your children are an investment. Because one day you're going to need them. But if you didn't pour into them, you're not going to have much of an investment when you get there. And so now's the time to invest in one another. Let's hold up right there tonight. Why don't you come pray? Maybe you need to ask the Lord, how do I need to do this? How can I apply this in my life? And ask the Lord to help you.